Hello, whiskey enthusiasts. My name is Andrew. This is a bourbon review, and tonight we have a limited edition for you. You guys have known me for long. You know my feelings about limited edition bourbons or scotches. Generally, I avoid them like the plague because generally they are overpriced and don't live up to the hype, and you have to fight a bunch of crazed fanatics just for the chance to buy it. Maybe that's an overreaction. Nonetheless, that's been my experience in the past. But today, thanks to Brett Mullins, I've got a little bit of E.H. Taylor 4 grain to review for you. E.H. Taylor 4 grain, if you don't know, is a new release by the Buffalo Trace Distillery. They tend to release a lot of kind of specialty whiskeys within their E.H. Taylor line. It's kind of become the new release label, if you will, for Buffalo Trace. They've got, I think, 9 different E.H. Taylor whiskeys now. A few of them were one-time releases, like the Warehouse C Tornado Survivor, Cured Oak, Seasoned Wood. I think those were just one-time releases. They've got year-round releases, like the small batch and single barrel bourbons. They have a rye that has a unique mash bill, a barrel-proof bourbon, and now we come to this new release, E.H. Taylor 4 grain. Why is it called 4 grain? Well, wouldn't you know, it's made from 4 different grains. Why is that different? Typically, a bourbon, which this is a distillation of a mash bill containing 3 grains. Usually those grains are corn, rye, and barley, or corn, wheat, and barley. This bourbon is made from all 4 of those: corn, rye, wheat, and barley. Now, we don't know the exact ratio of those grains, but we do know, since it's called a bourbon, that by law it's at least 51% corn. So, we'll get into it here. What should we expect? Who knows? There's not a lot of 4 grain whiskeys on the market, but Buffalo Trace is a very high quality distillery. The E.H. Taylor line is generally a high quality whiskey, so I think it's fair to have fairly high expectations for this whiskey. This whiskey has a suggested retail price of $69.99 or $70 from Buffalo Trace. Good luck finding it for that price, especially now that the release is over. There will be another release, though, in the spring of 2018. So, not a one-time release. I don't know if it's just going to be 2 releases or if it's going to be a biannual thing or quarterly thing. Who knows? We'll see. This whiskey, like the entire E.H. Taylor line, is bottled in bond. Colonel E.H. Taylor, who this line is named after, actually helped institute the Bottled in Bond Act back in 1897. And so everything except for the barrel proof is bottled in bond. What that means is this is bottled at 100 proof. It is made in charred new American oak barrels. It is the product of 1 distillation season, and it was aged in government bonded warehouses. Now, this whiskey is technically non-age stated, like pretty much all of Buffalo Trace's whiskey. Evidently, they just really hate age statements. But can you blame them? They're arguably on top of the bourbon world right now as far as distilleries go, and so why change what's working for you? However, in their press release for this bourbon, they stated that it was aged for 12 years. They said it was put into the barrels in 2005 and then bottled here earlier in 2017. So, let's get to tasting E.H. Taylor 4 grain bourbon. First thing that you notice here on the nose is that there's actually a fair amount of alcohol burn. It's not overpowering, it's not too distracting, but it definitely keeps you from getting your nose too close here. But underneath it, there's quite a bit going on. I notice a good amount of like a sticky toffee, a little bit of fruit reminiscent of tart cherries or maybe spiced cherries, and a fair amount of rye spice here, things like cinnamon, nutmeg, you know, your classic baking spices. There's a little bit of charcoal that adds a kind of dry element, and a little bit of vanilla. I'm going to call it vanilla bean. It's not super sweet or creamy, fairly dry, but clearly vanilla. Overall, it's an enjoyable nose and a balanced nose. There's a lot going on, nothing overpowers. Everything is just kind of sitting there in tandem with the other elements. Makes for a nose that you could spend a lot of time on dissecting, or just a quick sniff is enjoyable. Just like the nose, there's a moderate burn up front here again. And this is more fruit forward. Upon entry, there's an immediate tart cherry element. There's a dry oakiness, and again, there's some toffee, some vanilla bean. On the back end, it actually resolves into something kind of citrusy, almost like a blood orange. Overall, again, I think the best thing I can say about this bourbon is it's really well balanced. What I mean by that in this scenario is that there's something here for every palate. There's fruit, there's sweet, there's dry, there's spice, there's oak, and none of it is all that disjointed. None of it's overpowering. All of it actually works really well together. Let's do another sip and we'll get the finish on it. The finish gets a little bit more tannic. Again, what I mean by tannic is it dries out. It kind of dries your mouth, dries your tongue off, dries the roof of your mouth. Almost bitter. Tart cherries up front, they kind of resolve into more of a bitter fruit skin. The oak comes in fairly dry, and you get some vanilla and some charcoal. It kind of fades on that bitter end, more charcoal dominant as time goes on here. And if there is one weak spot in this bourbon, it's in the finish. It's a little more bitter than I would like. It's a little more one-dimensional, a little less well-rounded than what we saw on the nose and palate. That said, I'm a big fan of this. This is a great bourbon. Like I said, there's something here for everybody. If you like bourbon, you are going to like something about this whiskey because it has everything, honestly. And I mean that in the best way here. I am going to add a little bit of water. I think there's enough heat here that the water might cut that out. Maybe add a little bit of sweetness. But we're going to find out. See if that improves it, makes it worse, or really doesn't have a difference. Make a difference, that is. Now, some of you, if you're primarily bourbon drinkers, you may be highly skeptical of adding water to your whiskey, and that's fine. But if done correctly, water added to whiskey does make a difference for the better. Water is not primarily meant just to dilute it because you think it's too rough or too hot, or just to, you want less taste, or you want to swig it more. Water added in small amounts at a time. You see, I only added a 1/4 teaspoon here. What it does is it binds to different molecules, it changes different molecules, it splits apart molecules, it joins together different molecules, it changes the chemical composition of this whiskey, either for the better or the worse. But what we're doing here by adding water is going to most likely invoke new aromas, new flavors. It's going to fundamentally change the whiskey, maybe hardly at all, maybe not enough to even notice a difference, but maybe significantly enough either for the better or the worse. And so a lot of times if you have a whiskey, especially if you have a full bottle, you have multiple pours to mull over and to think about, you may not ever reach a whiskey's full potential if you never add water. So it's always worth trying neat first, completely, just as it is from the bottle, but it's always worth adding water to see if it reaches a better level with water added. So let's retaste it. Just a 1/4 teaspoon of water added here. The nose actually gets worse. I'll say that right off the bat. It loses its fruit. It loses its sweetness. It actually becomes a lot more grain heavy, almost like sweet corn, hay. You know, step out into Iowa around harvest time where I am right now. Smell the fields. That's kind of what this smells like now. Definitely not an improvement. More bitter, more astringent with the water added on the nose. The palate, same thing. It doesn't do much to reduce the burn, but it really cuts a lot of the sweetness out. Still get the tart cherry, still get some oak, but that's really it. It significantly unbalances this whiskey, and it significantly kind of one-dimensionalizes this whiskey. So overall, now we know. Don't add water to E.H. Taylor 4 grain. It's much better without. I could try adding more, but I don't think adding another quarter teaspoon is going to make it any better. If anything, I think it's going to make it worse. So now we know. Don't add water to the E.H. Taylor 4 grain. It's much better without. So overall recommendation. I am going to give this whiskey a score without water, where it had its maximum potential reached. I'm going to give it 87 out of 100. If you don't know my rating scale, it's a true 100-point scale. That means that it's not a letter grade scale where like 75 is a C, but it's, you know, it'd be more akin to 55 is a C. You know, if 55 is average, that makes 60 to 70 above average, 70 to 79 is, you know, good, 80 to 89 is excellent, and to get 90 or above, it's got to be, you know, like transcendental, like truly exceptional. So I'm giving this an 87 out of 100. That is an excellent whiskey. You know, that's the high side of excellent. So what does that mean for a buying recommendation? If you can find this at MSRP $70, absolutely I'd say buy a bottle. It's got everything that you could want in a bourbon. You know, I think it will be hard for anybody who likes bourbon to not like this, because there's so much in it, so much to be appreciated and enjoyed. When it comes to paying secondary prices, I would say, you know, anything over $100, you know, that's got to be your own discretion. If it were, you know, if you're going to take my advice, I would say at that point, find somebody to give you a sample or find a pour at a bar before you drop 100 plus on this. It may be worth it to you. Personally, it would not be worth paying more than $100 for me. But, you know, it's your money. Make your own call. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back in the future with more whiskey reviews. Have a great night, WBSE. Cheers.